Hello, I'm here to introduce you to a hobby that's been around for 50 years. I'm of course talking about tabletop role-playing games. But what is role-playing? Remember when you were a child, played house, soldiers, or even cops and robbers? Believe it or not, what you were doing was role-playing. You created your own character and acted them out. Tabletop role-playing games work the same way. Differences are that your character is on a sheet of paper. Someone creates the world you act in, and most actions are resolved by dice rolls. I mean, it does get rid of that pesky bang bang you're dead, no I ain't argument. So, to start you on this journey, I'm going to introduce you to a universe. A universe of many worlds, of mighty warriors and powerful wizards. Welcome to the world of Dungeons and Dragons. To help me on this journey, I have travelled to my local gaming shop to meet up with some of my friends whom I play D&D with on a regular basis. From first-time players whom have played for a year or so, to those who are 40-year veterans. So, let's look at the history of Dungeons and Dragons. Can you tell me the history of Dungeons and Dragons?
The history of Dungeons and Dragons. Well, it started with Gary Gygax and his pals. They were messing around with the wargaming rules they were using, doing historical wargaming, and thought it'd be interesting if some of their warriors from their historical games were to take on mythical beasts. So gradually they evolved a set of rules where their historical warriors, bowmen, whatever, could fight dragons, could fight vampires, all sorts of characters, mostly from Greek mythology. And eventually it evolved into a set of rules where a group of adventurers would go and try and slay the monsters, usually in a dungeon, and come away with the loot and save the day. That has evolved massively over the years into role-playing as we know it now, where we have complex storylines, plots, political machinations, a vastly more complex game than it used to be. The rules as well have become steadily more complex over the years, but at its core is still exactly the same system. You roll a d20 and you've got a target number to hit with a d20.
So, can you tell me of the history of D&D?
It was created in 1974 by two people called Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson,
Yep.
if I pronounce that right, and published originally by their own company of TSR, and then in 1997 onwards by Wizards of the Coast, and essentially kickstarted the entire RPG genre.
When I first started playing Dungeons and Dragons back in the 90s, there were a lot of phrases that I was unaware of, such as rolling 3d6 for your statistics to create your character. What was a DM? What was a PC? What was an NPC? So permit me and my friends to show you what these phrases mean. So,
How do the rules work? Well, yeah. In a kind of nutshell, we call D&D a D20 system, even though D&D invented the D20 system. You take a 20-sided dice, and for instance, you're trying to do something that involves your physical prowess. Say you have a +3 modifier for strength, and you roll a 20-sided dice, add the result to your modifier. The dungeon master, the person controlling the game, has a target number. So say you're trying to break down a door and it takes a roll of 15 to hit it. You roll your d20. If you get 13, add your 3 strength. 16, you successfully break the door down. There's then 100 other things that get added to that, but in essence, that's the sort of core of the D&D rules. Every single time you start by rolling a 20-sided dice to see if you're successful in achieving what you're trying to do.
And have the rules gotten easier with each edition, or are the older editions much more rules friendly?
Well, kind of checkered history there. The original rules that were based off of the chainmail wargaming rules were pretty straightforward. That kind of eventually morphed into what at the time was called Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, now second edition we call it, which was a much more complex game. Then they brought out the rules lighter version, D&D, the red box that everybody remembers with a dragon on the front. That was a very straightforward game. The entire rules take up about maybe 20 pages of a rule book. Third edition saw it getting more complex again. Fourth edition, I don't know if more complicated is the right word. Fourth edition is probably simpler to play than third edition, but fourth edition became more like a miniature skirmish game. Probably wasn't as well loved by long-term D&D players as the other editions have been. Fifth edition took a step back. Fifth edition's a simpler game again. Nothing like as simple as it was way back in the dawn of time, but certainly simpler than the last couple of editions have been. Rules lighter, which is right up my street. I don't like too many rules getting in the way of the game.
Fair enough. Could you please tell me what PCs and NPCs are and what they mean?
Surely. PC stands for player character. A player character is, as the name suggests, a character being played by one of the players at the table. So that character's actions are entirely controlled by the player that's playing them. They're essentially actors in the theatre of Dungeons and Dragons. The non-player characters, the NPCs, are everybody else in the D&D world, and their actions are controlled by the Dungeon Master. An NPC can be as simple as the owner of the tavern you're in. It can be the ruffian you meet in the street. It can be the goblin in the dungeon. Anybody who's not being played by one of the players is a non-player character and is controlled by the Dungeon Master.
Okay, and going on to that, could you tell me what the role of the Dungeon Master is, or the DM?
I've spent 38 years trying to figure that out exactly. At its very best, a role-playing game is collaborative storytelling, where the Dungeon Master and the players at the table combine to create an epic story. The Dungeon Master's role is to manage the campaign world, to adjudicate on how the players' actions then interact with that campaign world, to help keep the story moving. Run the game is probably too strong a term because the players should run the game. But the DM kind of makes the world work and also rolls all the dice for the bad guys.
Okay. And if you wasn't being a Dungeon Master for, say, a game, do you have a favourite class?
Heresy, I always DM. I've spent most of my life DMing. I very rarely play. When I do, I like to be at the centre of action. I tend to play fighters and similar characters to that. They don't have as much fun stuff they can do as your magical classes. They don't have as much sneaky stuff they can do as rogues and monks, but they're always involved in the game, and I kind of like to be involved in the game. So fighter all the way.
What's the advantages and disadvantages of the fighter?
What's the advantages and disadvantages of the fighter? In terms of rules or in terms of how they are to play?
How they are to play.
How they are to play. Well, it's simple, isn't it? I'm a simple soul. There's some bad guys. Let's pull a sword out and see how what happens to them when we stick the point end of it in them. It doesn't involve a great big secondary sheet of spells and what they do. It involves swinging a sword and being the hero and bailing out all the guys in normal clothes that try and steal the glory.
Can you tell me how the rules work in D&D?
At its base value, it's primarily about rolling a 20-sided dice and adding various modifiers to the results and against the numbered value of your opponent. The Dungeon Master or DM then uses that result to describe or explain the results.
Okay. And are the rules easier with each edition as each edition goes on?
Before 5th edition, no. Whichever one you first learned from will be the one that sticks with you rules-wise. However, the latest edition, 5th edition, has just simplified and streamlined everything to be easy to remember.
Okay, can you explain to me, please, the phrases PCs and NPCs?
PC means player character and is any character that is being controlled by any of the players, whereas an NPC is basically every other character which is controlled by the GM.
Okay. Okay, and if you're not DMing, could you tell me what your favourite class is?
Most of the time I just fill the gaps in the party dynamic, but I do tend to lean towards the barbarian, as that's just how I like to play.
Okay. So what's the advantages and disadvantages of that class?
The biggest advantage is for the barbarian is that due to it having high health and resistance, they are very difficult to kill. Primary weakness tends to be they are susceptible to mental attacks that can turn them against the party.
Okay. What is the role of the Dungeon Master?
Essentially to tell a story and guide and challenge the players through it.
Okay. And do you prefer that to playing, or do you prefer playing to being a Dungeon Master?
I prefer playing for me, as it's more fun to experience the story without knowing how it will go or what to expect.
So, you've got a Dungeon Master. You've rolled your player character. You've rolled their stats. Where do you play? What world are you in? Are you in Dragonlance? Forgotten Realms? Maybe in Barren Lands of Darksun? Let's talk to my friends about different campaign settings. About some of the campaign settings in Dungeons and Dragons over the years?
Yeah, there's been a great many. My heart and soul's in a place called Mystara that's virtually vanished from the internet. The whole world seems to have forgotten that it existed, but that's where the Red Box D&D was set, particularly around the Grand Duchy of Karanikos, which I could find my way around on a dark night without any problem. And the Empire of Thyatus, the Principalities of Glantry, the Republic of Darrican, all these places. Probably the most famous D&D campaign setting of all is Forgotten Realms. Forgotten Realms has been around... does it go back to 2nd edition, or was it 3rd before Forgotten Realms started?
2nd, I believe.
Was it 2nd when Forgotten Realms started? Which contains all your considered now classic locations in Dungeons and Dragons. The Sword Coast, Waterdeep. That's kind of where the game has moved increasingly to. There have been others along the way. There was Dragonlance, and then there was Ravenloft, which is kind of being dragged into the Forgotten Realms nowadays. Way back in the days, there was Oriental Adventures, which ultimately branched off into its own role-playing game and became Legend of the Five Rings. There's been a great many over the years, but my heart's always in Mystara.
So 2 more. Can you tell me about the settings of D&D?
Settings are basically locations in the multiverse where the campaign takes place. The first published one was Greyhawk, which was your typical medieval fantasy with a slight dark undertone to it. The most well-known one is the Forgotten Realms, which is high fantasy type world, so powerful monsters and epic stakes. And then you have the sort of other settings, such as like a steampunk world of Eberron, gothic horror of Ravenloft. They all run on the same edition mechanics, but distinctly separate.
So, we've covered the basic information of Dungeons and Dragons. But one question remains. How do you get started? And there's actually another question. What does D&D mean to me and my friends? So, if anyone was to play Dungeons and Dragons or wanted to get involved in it, what's the best way for them to get started? In your opinion?
In my opinion, well, I'm a hobby store owner, so there's only going to be one answer to that. Others may have different answers. I would say find your nearest hobby store or gaming cafe and walk through the door. Like starting any hobby, the hardest part is walking through the door and saying hello. But in my experience, you'll find that role players are generally an incredibly friendly and welcoming bunch that love having new players around. So walk through the door of your local hobby store, pull up a seat and ask to roll a character up. It's really simple as that. Of course, as the world's evolved now, a lot of people play their role-playing games online on websites like Roll20. But I think it's pretty difficult to get a feel for how a role-playing game works without playing it around a table with other people that know what they're doing. So I'd always say that's the best way to start playing.
The final question is, what has D&D meant to you as a player and as a person?
So very much. It's been a huge part of my life since I was a tiny kid. Escapism, to step away from the stresses of day-to-day life, to go and live in a fantasy world for even a few hours. I've made friendships through it, lifelong friendships through playing Dungeons and Dragons. Now I have a business that is, at the end of the day.
Well, what is the best way, do you think, to get started if someone was interested in playing?
Probably find the nearest gaming shop and inquire there. Or ask to join in if any friends are currently running an ongoing campaign. Or if you're feeling a bit shy and nervous about people and that, there's always the computer RPGs to get the general idea of things, such as the old 1998 Baldur's Gate game.
Yeah, good game that.
That's what got me into it.
And finally, what does Dungeons and Dragons mean to you as a player and a person?
Literally, it's a fun escape from the real world and a good social environment with like-minded people.
Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this documentary and come with me on my journey. Hopefully we'll get the chance to explore other universes and other worlds in the tabletop genre. But that is another adventure.